Today, I'm going to be ranking every single Linde gang member in a tier list, starting from worst, going all the way up to the best. Like this video and subscribe for more videos like this. Starting off in 23rd place, we have OShea. OShea is just kind of a boring character. I mean, her death is kind of interesting, and her interactions with like Mary Beth and Dutch are kind of interesting, but she's just Dutch's lover, and she doesn't really add anything to the gang's interactions or dynamics, and she's just kind of off on her own for a while, so she's not that good of a character, and she just kind of does her own thing, so that's why she has to be an F tier. In 22nd place, I have Leopold Strauss. While he is very vital to the story components, I feel like he's not that big of a member of the gang. He's kind of just off on his own like OShea is, and he doesn't really add anything to the gang's dynamics, and he doesn't really have any like friendships with any of the other gang members. So I feel like he doesn't really work that well, and I just don't like him because of kind of what he did to Arthur. He just kind of used Arthur. So I don't know. He's just this guy that is weak, and he just kind of uses other people. So I think he has to go in F tier, even though he is very vital to the story's component. In 22nd place, I have Reverend Swanson. While I kind of feel like he is kind of interesting and cool because he's just a drunk, he doesn't really add anything to the gang's dynamics, and I feel like Reverend Swanson is just kind of a lame character. So I have to put him in D tier. He doesn't really add that much to the story. He is in that one part where if Arthur has low on her and he goes to the train station, he's going to be leaving there. Otherwise, I think he just leaves off screen, but I don't know. I feel like he just doesn't add that much, so he has to go in D tier. In 20th place, I've got Tilly Jackson. Tilly is kind of interesting. There is that one mission where you have to go rescue her from Anthony Foreman's house, but I feel like she doesn't really add that much to the gang, and I feel like she's low-key just kind of annoying with the whole Grimshaw thing. She just wants to kill Grimshaw all the time, and her and Kieran always get into beef with Grimshaw. So I don't know. She's kind of cool for the gang dynamics, but I feel like it really just works with her, Kieran, and Mary Beth together, and she doesn't really add much to the rest of the gang's dynamic. In 19th place, I have Kieran. Kieran is kind of interesting. Like, I feel like she's kind of cool with her relationship with Sean, and just she's in like the Valentine bank robbery, but I feel like just her being drunk kind of takes off a lot of the ability of her, and I feel like she's just kind of boring at times. So I don't know. She's an interesting character, but she doesn't really do that much for me, and I feel like her whole dynamic is just kind of in relation to other characters instead of building on the whole gang dynamic. So she also has to go in D tier. In 18th place, I have Bill Williamson. I feel like Bill is definitely a bigger part of the gang than, a lot of these other people are, but he doesn't really play a big part in any of the actual heists or stuff. And it's like you have the one Van Horn thing you do with Bill, but I feel like in every other mission, it's always Bill as a background guy that's also there to help you. And I feel like Arthur and Bill just don't like each other. So like you as the player, it's a lot harder to like Bill. So I think he'll also have to go in D tier with the others. And I feel like he just doesn't add that much to the gang dynamic as a whole. In 17th place, I've got Kieran Duffy. Kieran is kind of a cool member. He came from the O'Driscolls and he transferred over, but I feel like no one really trusts him, even Arthur. And I feel like while him and Arthur kind of have some interesting dynamics, there's like when he saves Arthur's life, and there's that one fishing mission which I think is kind of interesting. Kieran just doesn't really take part in a lot in terms of like gang dynamic stuff, and he's not in a lot of the missions, so you can't really grow to love him that much, which I think he's still a cool character, but you can't really grow to love him that much. And he and Mary Beth have kind of an interesting romance, but I don't really think he does that much, but probably have to go with C tier for Kieran. In 16th place, I've got Susan Grimshaw. Miss Grimshaw is kind of interesting. I feel like she's kind of just the person that cleans up for everyone else, but I feel like she goes from like a D tier character, in my opinion, to a C tier just in chapter 6, where she shoots OShea, and then she also gets shot by Micah, where she kind of becomes a badass in that respect. But I feel like before that, she's kind of just a D tier character, but once she kind of becomes a badass, I feel like it works kind of well. So she's also in C tier with everyone else. In 15th place, I have Mr. Peterson. Mr. Peterson's kind of an interesting character. I feel like his dynamic with Sadie is kind of interesting. I feel like everyone else just kind of shits on him, but it's kind of funny, and I feel like he kind of just goes along with it well. He has fond memories of the gang, and I think he's a bigger member of the team than it really seems like, because he cooks food for everyone, and everyone's kind of dependent on him to actually make food. So I think it works well, and I think Mr. Peterson's just kind of a fun character. So that's why he has to go in C tier. In 14th place, I have JavierEscuela. Javier is kind of interesting, and like he works well to the gang. I feel like he and Arthur kind of have some interesting moments when they go up and like rob the people in, I don't know where it is, like in Amberino, I think it is. And then when they go fishing, and then on Guarma, like you kind of rescue Javier. But I feel like there's not that much many interesting dynamics between the two of them. And I feel like Javier, like Bill, is just kind of an outside member in a lot of the things he does. He's not really the main guy that's running stuff, and he's just kind of, an outside member that goes along with other people's plans. So I'm going to have to put him in C tier. In 13th place, I've got Uncle. Uncle's really interesting in terms of camp dynamics because that's all he does. He just sits around at camp, gets drunk, and just roasts people. But I feel like he's not that fun of a character in the actual like gang part of it because he doesn't really do anything. He just sits down and just gets roasted or roasts other people. So I don't know. Uncle's a fun character, but I feel like you really get to know him in the actual epilogue versus in the actual gang part. And we're just talking about the gang part. So I'm going to have to put him in C tier, but he is a really fun character nonetheless. In 12th place, I've got Abigail Roberts. Abigail is a great mother, and I feel like that's her main point in the gang. But I feel like her and Arthur and John, they have a nice like three-way triangle relationship thing, if you want to call it that. Like Arthur and Abigail are both trying to get John to, raise his son. And I feel like all that kind of works well together. And I think Abigail's dynamics in the camp really work well because everyone wants to take care of Jack and they want John to actually become a good father. So it works well. So I'm going to have to put her in the bottom of B tier. In 11th place, I have Mr. Josiah Trelawney. I really like his character. I feel like he just works well with the gang, and he's just kind of this whimsical character that comes around sometimes, helps the gang out, and just does stuff. And I feel like all the missions he's in are kind of really interesting, like robbing the stagecoach. He kind of plays it up well, and he's like Hosea, where he's like really a good trickster. And then the Fine Night of Debauchery. I feel like these are all like really fun missions that he's in, and he and Arthur have a nice little connection where, they both know about each other's families, or like Arthur knows about Trelawney's family, and Trelawney kind of holds it against Arthur. And I don't know, it's kind of interesting, and I really like their dynamic, so I'm going to have to put Trelawney in B tier. In 10th place, I've got Mary Beth. Mary Beth is a really interesting character. I feel like her and Arthur have a nice, cool connection where it's like they're like brother and sister, I'd say. But I think Mary Beth is a really just interesting character. Her relationship with Kieran is interesting, and I feel like she's just one of the nicest characters in the entire game. So I think she's a really interesting character, especially how she relates to like Dutch's dynamic with Molly O'Shea. And just, I don't know, I feel like she works really well with everyone. She's a really nice character. I feel like you kind of have to like her just as an RDR2 fan. And I think she's just one of the more interesting woman characters in the actual Van der Linde gang. And I feel like she has the most interesting dynamic in the Van der Linde gang. In 9th place, I've got Sean McGuire. Sean is definitely one of the most charismatic people in all of the Van der Linde gang, and I feel like he has to be one of just the funniest characters. I think everything that kind of goes on with Sean, he kind of just plays it up a lot, and I feel like he is probably the most interesting character, at least for a certain time period in RDR2, because he gets rescued at the middle of Chapter 2, and then he comes back and he dies in the middle of Chapter 3 as well. But I feel like there's a ton of fun missions with him, and while he is only in the gang, like you only know him in the gang for a short while, I feel like when he's there, he's just a super amazing character, and he would be higher if only he had a little bit more time in the gang. But I feel like because there's not that much time to develop Sean, and you don't get as many good missions as you do with some of these other characters, I feel like you can't put him any higher. In 8th place, we have Lenny Summers. I feel like Lenny is a really interesting character because it feels like he was one of the only people in the gang to actually potentially have like a future doing anything else besides like robbing banks, but he doesn't get the chance to because he dies. But I feel like he is a less like charismatic character, even though you get to see him a lot more than like someone like Sean, because Sean, like, I don't know, is kind of more interesting. While Lenny, there are some really, really fun missions with him, like taking over Sadie Bell and the Lenny mission. I feel like the rest of Lenny, I feel like he's a pretty one-dimensional character, and there's not that much going on with Lenny. So I will have to say he's a really fun character, but I can't put him any higher than B tier, but he's going to be at the top of B tier. In 7th place, I've got Hosea Matthews. Hosea is probably one of the most fun characters in the game. He's just kind of a trickster, and I really like what he does with everything, but I think he is a little bit less well-rounded of a character than some of these other people up here, because I feel like he dies kind of early and he doesn't really have the chance to redeem himself like, I mean, a lot of these other characters do. And I think he doesn't get the chance to save everyone. Like, I feel like is his main thing. So it kind of sucks because you don't get to see as much of his interactions with other people as like you would with some of these other characters. But I feel like he's definitely a very important member to the gang, and I feel like he's just a fun character to be with. Him and Arthur have really good camaraderie, and I feel like they work really well together. They both are like really smart, and I feel like if Arthur's the enforcer, Jose is the brains behind it, and it works really well between the two of them, and I just love their dynamic together. So I feel like he has to be an A tier, but he can't be an S tier. In sixth place, I've got Sadie Adler. Sadie is a really interesting character. She's kind of just a loose cannon, but her and Arthur's camaraderie throughout the game really works well to play with their dynamic, and I feel like she's just a fun character to hang out with and like for Arthur to be with. So even though they're not like dating or anything, but I think it really works well to show how much of a loose cannon she is. And I think sometimes it kind of makes me mad how much of a loose cannon she is, but just because she is such an interesting character and like she shoots at the O'Driscolls and she's like a badass woman, it really works to further her character. And I feel like how much she actually cares about Abigail and John also works well with that. And I just think she like sees the same vision that Arthur and Charles and John do. And I feel like that's kind of why I like her more as a character than some of these other people. Rounding out the A tier, in fifth place, we have Charles Smith. Charles is one of the more interesting characters in this game. I feel like he's a really interesting character, but his morals are kind of really set, which takes him away from being an S tier character. I feel like he's one of the most likable characters. He just kind of does the right thing the entire time, and he always beats up Micah, like in this scene, or he just does some fun stuff. And I feel like him and Arthur are just really, really actually good friends, and I feel like there's not that same dynamic between anyone else besides Arthur and John, which I feel like is the only other really, really good friendship Arthur has, especially at the end of the game. And I just think Charles kind of does everything right, and he wants to help everyone out. And while that kind of takes him back from being an S tier character where he just has one moral standpoint, I feel like it really works in his favor as well, and it makes him like this really hardened character that just wants to do the right thing for everyone and just do the right thing by everyone else. So it really works well, and I really like his work with the other Native Americans. In fourth place, I've got John Marston. I feel like John definitely is probably one of the biggest members of the gang, but I feel like in the actual like Red Dead Redemption 2 part, especially when he is a gang member, I feel like you don't get that much characterization of him. You see him turning from someone that doesn't really care about Jack and like, I mean, he cares about Abigail, but like he starts to care more about Jack and become more of a family member as time goes on. And I feel like that really works in his favor, but I think John as a whole isn't as strong of a character as the other three, but still plays a really big role, and I think he's still an amazing character. And you see how he kind of turns into a family man by the end of his time in Red Dead Redemption 2, at least in the main story. Chapter 6, you see him go to his family instead of trying to take out Micah, Bill, Dutch, and Javier, because he just wants to be a family man now. And I feel like that really works, and I really like the characterization, how they did it. Of course, him and Arthur are like actually really good friends by the end of it because they kind of grew up together and they were brothers. So I don't know, it really works well together, and I really like how they use him and Arthur, and they really just connect well together. But I don't know, I really just love John as a character, but I don't think he really stacks up to these other people in S tier, but he's still an S tier character. In third place, I've got Micah Bell, the main antagonist. I don't know if you want to call him the antagonist of this game, but I think he's just a great character, and I think everything that Micah does in RDR2 just really goes to push the game forward, and you just love to hate this guy because he's such a hateable character. He's just an asshole to Arthur, but I feel like their dynamic really works well together because they both want to be Dutch's main man. I feel like Micah really just wants to supplant Arthur as Dutch's second guy, and Arthur really just has to stop him. But I mean, it doesn't work in the end because Micah knows that Dutch just wants to go bigger and better and want to do all this more stuff. But I don't know, it really works. I really love Micah as a character. He's a great antagonist, even if he's not really the antagonist for most of the story. But he's just a character that you have to love, and you have to just love what he does for the story as a whole. I mean, I feel like he really works to push the story forward and really just get it going. Without Micah, this whole story would just kind of suck because Micah was the one who kind of pushed Dutch to go off the rails and be this whole new guy. In second place, I've got Dutch van der Linde. I mean, I feel like everyone has to put Dutch at number 2 just because he's just the charismatic leader that everyone wants, and he drives forward the plot maybe as much as anyone as Micah does. And I feel like he really leads all these interesting plans. He did the thing between the Greys and Braithwaites. He robbed Cornwall. He did the thing with the Native Americans. He's just the man who leads all these plans through. And while he does kind of become a crazy guy by the end of the Red Dead Redemption 2, I feel like he's still a really interesting character, and you have to love his dynamic with Arthur because it starts as like this really brotherly love or like fatherly love, and it really goes down to like he just stops loving Arthur like that, and he eventually turns to Micah's side instead of being on Arthur's side. And I just think Dutch is the perfect like charismatic character that you have to have. He doesn't have fear of anyone. He's just this really badass character that really drives the story of Red Dead Redemption 2 the whole time. And while I wouldn't say he's really the antagonist of the story at all, he is a perfect antagonist. In you see the ways he is, and he's so set in his morals. He wants to take away all this money from the rich, the people that really just shit on other people for being poor, and he wants to bring it back to like other people, and he wants to provide for the family. And I think what he does, and he's really set in his ways on doing that, it really has a weird moralistic way. It's like very similar to Charles, where he wants to do all these things in a specific way, and he doesn't back down to them, and then he just goes more and more over the top on them, and then he kind of falls out of it with Micah, and he loses himself, in my opinion. So I don't know, I feel like he's a great character, and you have to just love what he does. He's just a badass, and he really just drives the story forward, and you just have to love him as a character, even if you kind of have to hate him at the end because he turns on Arthur. And in first place, you have to have Arthur Morgan. He's definitely the greatest character in this story, but you could argue that he's the greatest character in fiction as a whole, or at least the greatest video game character. And I think just Arthur is such an amazing, well thought out character. And I think Rockstar did their best to make Arthur a character that you can sympathize with, and at the same time you want to be this guy, because you see him going from just like, I don't know, a regular kind of enforcer dude to becoming a very sympathetic character, and he wants to help everyone else and help them get out of this situation that he got himself into. And I just think he's a great character, and you can really, I guess, relate with him, because I feel like most people, as their story progresses, you kind of follow the same route that Arthur takes. And especially like you try and help more people, you try and save more people, and you just become a more honorable guy, as you want to call it, in Red Dead Redemption 2. And I just think overall, Arthur's just the perfect character for this story, and his story really encapsulates Red Dead Redemption 2. I mean, Red Dead Redemption 2 is Arthur's story, and you just want to spend more time with this character. I don't know, it's just so amazing. And Arthur, just his camaraderie with all these people, the banter he has, and I feel like just everything, the depth this game goes into. It's a 60-hour game, and there's just so much content with it, and I feel like Arthur is just the perfect character to play through the whole thing with. And you just see, like, I don't know, it's just such a fun game, and overall Arthur is the reason why it's super fun. And I feel like just because you play as Arthur, it becomes so much more than just Arthur is a good character. You become Arthur, and like you want yourself to be a good character, so Arthur becomes a good character. And I feel like that's why Arthur, a lot of people say Arthur's the best fictional character of all time, when I don't know if I'd really say that, but he definitely is this guy that is one of the best characters of all time, and it's just so fun to play as him and just go through this whole journey as Arthur. Okay, guys, that's my full list. If you guys did want to change anything, put it down in the comments, say what your list would be, say what you would change. And anyway, this is just my opinion, so don't hate on me for having one character way below what you'd think it'd be. Just write it down in the comments and say why you think it'd be like that. And if you do want more videos like that, please subscribe. I'm going to be putting out these tier lists every single day on the dot. So please subscribe for more tier lists like this, and please like the video if you did like the video.